Romany and Raq by G Bramwell Evens. Give me the clear blue sky over my head and the green turf beneath my feet, a winding road before me, and then to thinking. Chapter 20. Nature's Insurance. March. 2 or 3 fields away I could hear the laughing voices of children, and hurrying across the peewit guarded lands I came across Jerry and Ned. Jerry was cutting down palm and giving the branches to the youngsters for decorating the village church. Ned, I thought, looked on rather disapprovingly. He hates cutting flowers or stripping trees of their glory. "It's a kind of murder," he says. When the children had departed, we all 3 stood and paid homage to the branches, clothed in silver velvet and golden filigree. They brought to my mind the poet laureate's beautiful words, and I quoted them, knowing it would please Ned. "The woodland willow stands, a lonely bush of nebulous gold. There the spring goddess cowers in faint attire of frightened fire." "Nebulous gold, frightened fire," repeated Ned with shining eyes. "That just about hits it off." While the old postman was saying over to himself the phrases that he so much relished, Jerry wandered down the hedge. I saw him standing before a small tree, and the next moment he called out to Ned to come and have a look. We found ourselves gazing at another willow, but no golden globes adorned its bare branches. Instead, narrow grey-green catkins looked out demurely on the spring morning. "Is this another kind of willow, for there's no palm on it?" asked Jerry, pointing to the bush. Ned shook his head. "That's Mr. Willow," said Ned, looking back at the tree from which the children had received their gold and silver bunches. "And this is Mrs. Willow. You know, both of you, I reckon, that there is male and female in the plant world, just as there is male and female in the animal." Jerry made a gesture which conveyed surprise and wonder, and this encouraged the old man to proceed. "Sometimes," he continued, "you find the male and female flowers growing on the same branch. In the willow they're different trees. The golden's the male." "Don't thought to look for one another then," said Jerry with a smile. Ned glowered at Jerry for a moment, and I nudged him to be quiet. Anything approaching levity, I knew, would make the old man close up as tightly as an oyster. "Go on, Ned," I said soothingly. "Tell us some more." "If you want to see what I mean," said he, "look round for some hazel catkins. You'll find 'em in that spinney yonder. You will not only see the golden lamb's tails, but you will come across on the same branch some little flowers like a fairy brush. Them's the females, and the swinging catkins are the males." He was quiet for a moment, and then said, "A puff of wind, a shower of gold from the shaking tails, millions of grains floating in the air, most of 'em lost except 1 or 2 that settle on the fairy brush, and where they've settled, a little bunch of nuts in the autumn." "Fine," said Jerry appreciatively, and I saw by the look Ned gave him that the poacher had more than made up for his former lightsome remark. "And millions of grains of lice dust will be wasted?" I asked. Ned nodded. "If the male flowers were mean, and only made a few grains, you see, they might never find the female flower. But he smothers the air with 'em so that some of 'em must find their target. Nature," concluded Ned as he left us, "allers leaves a margin. She's prodigal where life is concerned." Jerry and I moved on towards the spinney which Ned had indicated. We found a few hazel bushes, and after examining them and confirming Ned's statement, Jerry said to me, "There's somewhat farther on there that you ought to see, but put a leash on the dog so as not to disturb it." After walking for 100 yards or so, My companion halted before a large clump of hazels and motioned me to go in carefully. I could see at a glance that the bare branches held nothing of interest, so I scrutinised the ground. For a long time all I could see was a carpet of moist beech leaves, with here and there a bit of dark brown withered bracken. I looked back at Jerry, and as I moved towards the left he said quietly, "You're getting warmer now." This time I quoted the ground with my glance, scrutinising first the leaves which lay at my feet. Then, about 6 feet away, I suddenly espied two bright, dark eyes, motionless, expressionless. As though a puzzle picture began to loom up from among a tangle of roots, stems and grasses, so I traced the round head of a wild duck as it curved down towards a brown back beautifully pencilled with dark markings. She was sitting on a nest, the edge of which exactly matched her surroundings in colour. Duck, nest and environment were a symphony in brown. I had only to glance away for a moment to lose sight of them. I crept nearer to her. She never moved a muscle. What strength of will or instinct she must have had to sit like a carved statue whilst an enemy walked so close to her treasures. Then, unfortunately, as I backed away, thinking that I would leave her to reign in solitary grandeur, I stumbled over a concealed root. There was a hasty rush by the startled bird from the nest. The next moment she appeared a few yards away from me as a bruised thing with a broken wing, whilst her eyes looked expectantly at me, hoping that I should give chase, a trick that had been handed down to her through centuries of duckdom. Seeing that I refused to be drawn, she hobbled away, and a moment or two later we heard her wings whistling over the tops of the trees. "That's a bit of real artistry," I said to Jerry, as we both examined the nest. 13 eggs, said Jerry, pushing aside the down at the edge of the nest. "I wonder how many on 'em will ever grow up." As we retraced our steps through the wood, the old poacher said, "I reckon that if she rears a couple on 'em, it will be about the limit." 2 out of 13, I said, rather incredulously. Jerry nodded. "That's why she lays 13 or more," answered my companion. "It's Ned's story, and nature always allowing a margin of her again." "Mind you," he said, after a moment, "I don't say as how she'll think it all out, but instinct makes her hatch out more'n ever'll grow up." "Why?" I asked, hoping to draw out some reminiscence. "What perils have the ducklings to face? They can swim and dive as soon as they are dry and out of the shell." We were on the edge of the wood at the time, and Jerry, pointing to the river, asked me how far it was from the wood. "I should say it was about half a mile," I answered. "Well then," Jerry continued, "try and think of them youngsters as soon as they are out of the shell. The old duck's first job is to get 'em down to the river. They all set off, the young uns following her, peeping and cheeping like young canaries. They meet up with all sorts of adventures. There are holes in the ground, and maybe a little un falls in it. If he can get himself out, well and good. If he can't, then he stays there. The old duck won't lift him out. She leads him down a drain, maybe, that runs into a dyke. What hides in the holes of that drain?" "Rats," I said. Jerry nodded. "And as the little uns follow their mother, the weakest is at the end of the line. He maybe stumbles over a stone, lies overturned on his back for a minute, and gives a shrill little cry of fear. But he never gives another, though the mother duck stops and looks round to see what's the matter. She sees nought wrong, for a rat has nipped it in the back of the neck and dragged it up a hole. That's 2 of 'em vanished." "She'll be all right, though, when she gets to the open ground," I said, pointing to the corner of the spinney. Jerry nodded. "All right, so long as there's no sparrowhawk on watch. A duck on land's about as awkward as a cow in thick mud. She's not in her natural element." "Well," I said, "with any luck she'll still have 11 youngsters to carry on with when she reaches the river." Jerry didn't say anything for some moments, and we walked towards the river itself. Finally we reached a place where the current was sluggish, and where the reeds were already beginning to show their spring colours. You see that bit of slow water there, said he, pointing to a still pool which lay at our feet. I was sitting here one day last spring, and there, amongst the reeds, I saw a big pike. He's a shark of the fresh water, I interpolated. A reeling and all, Jerry went on. He was about 10 pound if an ounce. He lay there amongst the weeds like a striped shadow of doom. So I said to myself, I'll have you out of that, you beggar. So I got some wire out of my pocket. You always keep that on you for mending purposes, I suppose, I said with a smile. With a bit of wire, a bit of string, a knife and half a crown, you can face the world, he said with a grin. Well, as I was saying, Jerry went on, I soon had a running noose made, then I cut down a willow stick, tied the wire on the end of it, and then, here Jerry suited the action to the word, I gently lowered it till I got his tail inside the noose. Jerry then gave a quick pull, a dexterous twist of the wrist, a reaching down as he lifted the big brute out of the water, and in imagination I could see it lying stretched out on the rock. I gave him an only out with a stone, and that finished his day's work. But when I opened him out, here Jerry looked at me significantly, there were 2 young ducklings inside him. That's why nature always leaves a margin for all eventualities. I have often wondered, I said to my companion as we walked along the bank, whether animals grieve. Some do, most don't, answered he promptly. It wouldn't be hardly fair making a world where losses were always happening if the losers had the power of grieving much, would it? Don't you worry yourself over that side of the question, for you're not dealing with human beings. If all our ducklings went west, the owl duck would be more anxious to raise another brood as quick as she could than spend time in piping her eyes out, I can tell you.